The whistle of the train echoed across the dusty plains of Kingman, Arizona, as Catherine Finley clutched her small valise with white-knuckled fingers, the rounded swell of her belly impossible to hide beneath her travel-worn dress. The year was 1883, and an unwed woman in her condition might as well have been wearing a scarlet letter pinned to her chest. Catherine Kate, to the few who had ever shown her kindness, kept her gaze fixed on the wooden platform beneath her feet, counting the weathered planks as passengers disembarked around her. 6 months pregnant and alone in a town where she knew not a soul, her carefully laid plans had disintegrated with each passing mile of the journey west. "Last call for Kingman," the conductor shouted, tipping his hat as he moved along the platform. "Next stop Needles, California." She hadn't intended to stop here. Her destination had been San Francisco, where her second cousin twice removed had promised work in her seamstress shop. But the letter that had awaited her at the last stop had changed everything. The cousin was dead consumption, and Kate was truly alone now. The station was emptying, curious glances lingering on her protruding middle as folks whispered behind raised hands. Kate had grown accustomed to such scrutiny in the 2 months since she'd fled Philadelphia, but it never stung any less. "You planning on standing there till sunset, miss?" The voice startled her. Deep and resonant, it belonged to a tall man leaning against the station wall. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of a dust-covered Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal suntanned forearms, and a worn leather vest. "I'm just catching my breath," Kate replied, hating how her voice trembled. He pushed away from the wall, and she instinctively took a step back. Men had proven themselves untrustworthy in her experience, especially the charming ones. And this one, despite the trail dust, had a certain confidence in his bearing that set her nerves jangling. "Name's Jackson Farrell," he said, not extending his hand, which she appreciated. "Station master's about to close up, and he doesn't take kindly to loiterers. You got somewhere to go?" Kate pressed her lips together, considering a lie, but something in his direct gaze made her hesitate. "Not exactly." He nodded as if her answer confirmed something he'd already guessed. His eyes, a warm hazel that reminded her of autumn leaves, flicked briefly to her midsection before returning to her face. Figured as much. He sighed, removing his hat to reveal thick chestnut hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. "Look, I don't mean to pry, but this town ain't exactly welcoming to," he cleared his throat, "ladies in your situation." The station master emerged from his office, keys jangling in his hand. His disapproving gaze landed on Kate, narrowing when he took in her condition. "We don't need your kind here," he called out, voice carrying across the now empty platform. "There's a mission 30 miles south that takes in fallen women." Kate felt heat rush to her face, humiliation and anger warring in her chest. Before she could respond, Jackson Farrell stepped forward, placing himself between her and the station master. "That's no way to speak to my wife, Simmons," he said, voice deceptively casual though Kate could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Wife?" The station master's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Since when are you married, Farrell?" "Been a while since I've been to town," Jackson replied smoothly. "Philadelphia wedding. My Catherine's come to join me now that I've got the homestead ready." Kate stood frozen, uncertain whether to contradict this stranger's outlandish lie or play along. The protective circle of his arm didn't quite touch her shoulders, giving her space to step away if she chose. "Tell them you're my wife," he murmured, pitched for her ears alone. "Just until we're clear of here." Something in his voice, a genuine concern rather than presumption, made her decision. Kate stepped closer to his side, forcing her features into what she hoped resembled a besotted expression. "I'm sorry for any confusion," she said to the station master, whose skepticism was plain on his weathered face. "The journey was longer than expected, and I'm afraid I'm quite exhausted." Simmons' eyes darted between them, suspicion evident. "Farrell, you've been in these parts 5 years and never mentioned a wife." "Some things a man keeps close to his heart," Jackson replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to get my wife home. She's had a long journey." He collected Kate's valise in one hand, the other hovering near the small of her back without touching her as he guided her toward the station exit. Kate could feel the station master's gaze boring into her back as they departed. Once they were around the corner and out of sight, Jackson dropped his arm and put a respectful distance between them. "I apologize for the presumption, madam. Folks around here can be unforgiving, especially to women traveling alone." Kate regarded him warily. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." Something flashed in his eyes, a sadness perhaps, before he shrugged. "My sister found herself in similar circumstances some years back. Nobody stepped up for her when it mattered." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, rang true. Kate relaxed fractionally. "Thank you, Mr. Farrell." "Jackson," he corrected. "And you are Catherine Finley," she replied. "Though most call me Kate." He nodded, seeming to consider something as he glanced down the dusty Main Street. "Have you eaten today, Kate?" Her stomach answered with an embarrassing rumble before she could respond. A flush crept up her neck as Jackson's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I'll take that as a no. There's a decent cafe down the street. The owner, Mrs. Holloway, is discreet and kind. We can figure out your next steps over a hot meal." Kate hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "I have very little money, Mr. Farrell." "Jackson," he reminded her gently, "and consider it payment for using your name in my fabrication back there." His expression grew serious. "No strings attached, just food and conversation. You have my word." Against her better judgment, or perhaps because hunger and exhaustion had worn down her defenses, Kate nodded. "Lead the way then, Jackson, Mrs. Holloway's cafe was a small, clean establishment with gingham curtains, and the savory aroma of beef stew simmering on the stove. The older woman greeted Jackson warmly, raising an eyebrow at Kate, but making no comment about her condition. "Give us the private corner if you would, Ellie," Jackson requested, and the woman nodded, leading them to a table partially screened by a wooden divider. Once they were seated with steaming bowls before them, Kate found herself devouring the rich stew with unladylike enthusiasm. Jackson ate more slowly, occasionally glancing up at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "When's the baby due?" he asked quietly after she'd slowed her pace. Kate stiffened, her spoon hovering midway to her mouth. 3 months, give or take." She lowered her spoon, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not ashamed of my child, Mr. Farrell, though society would have me be." "Jackson," he corrected for the 3rd time, his expression softening. "And I'm not judging you, Kate. Just trying to understand your situation so I might offer proper help." She set her spoon down, suddenly wary. "And why would you help me? What could you possibly gain?" His jaw tightened, a flicker of hurt crossing his features before his expression settled into something more neutral. "Not everyone has ulterior motives." Kate had the grace to look abashed. "Forgive me, recent experiences have made me cautious." Jackson nodded, seeming to accept this. "The baby's father is not in the picture," she said firmly, letting her tone make it clear this wasn't open for discussion. To his credit, Jackson didn't press. Instead, he outlined her limited options in Kingman with pragmatic frankness. The town had no boarding house that would accept an unwed mother-to-be. The mission the station master had mentioned was indeed 30 miles south, but its reputation for harsh treatment of fallen women was well known. "There's Mrs. Brennan's place," he said finally. "She takes in laundry and might let you help in exchange for a room, but she's deeply religious and would require daily penance for my sins," Kate finished bitterly. "I'm familiar with the type." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The problem is, now that I've claimed you as my wife, word will spread. Kingman isn't big enough for secrets." Kate's heart sank. She'd allowed his spontaneous lie to trap her in an even more precarious position. "I should never have played along." "No, I shouldn't have put you in that position," Jackson countered. "But what's done is done, and we need to figure out what happens next." The door to the cafe swung open, and a portly man in a black suit entered, his gaze immediately finding their table. "The town's mayor," Jackson explained under his breath as the man approached with a broad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Farrell, heard the good news about your marriage. How remiss of you not to introduce your bride to the community." Jackson stood, offering a tight smile. "Mayor Prescott, this is my wife, Catherine. Kate, this is Mayor Edward Prescott." The mayor's eyes lingered on Kate's midsection before he offered a patronizing smile. "Congratulations are in order, I see. Though I must say, it's unusual for a woman in your condition to travel so far." Kate forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "My doctor assured me the journey was safe, and I was eager to join my husband. Of course, of course." The mayor's tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "Well, Mrs. Farrell, you must join us for the town social next Saturday." All the ladies will be eager to meet Jackson's mysterious bride. After the mayor departed, Kate slumped in her chair. "This is getting complicated quickly." Jackson's expression was grim. "I'm afraid I've made things worse for you, but maybe." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have a proposition for you, Kate, a temporary arrangement that might benefit us both." Kate raised an eyebrow, wariness returning. "Go on." "I have a homestead about 5 miles outside of town. It's modest but comfortable. I've been working to establish a small horse breeding operation." He took a deep breath. "I need a wife, or at least the appearance of one." "Excuse me, not like that," he hastened to add, color rising in his cheeks. "I filed claim under the Homestead Act 3 years ago. The land will be mine free and clear, if I can prove continuous residence and improvements for 5 years. But there's a new land commissioner who's challenging some of the claims, including mine. He says my frequent trips for horse trading mean I haven't maintained continuous residence." Kate frowned. "What does that have to do with needing a wife? A married homesteader with a child on the way would have a much stronger claim to permanent settlement," Jackson explained. "And you need somewhere safe to have your baby, away from judgment and gossip." "You're suggesting we continue this charade?" Kate asked incredulously. "For how long?" "Until your baby is born and you're recovered enough to move on, if that's what you want, or until the land commissioner confirms my claim, whichever comes first." Jackson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Separate rooms, of course. You'd have your privacy. All I ask is that you help with some of the household duties as you're able." Kate stared at him, trying to determine if he was sincere or if this was an elaborate scheme with hidden intentions. "Why would you take such a risk for a stranger?" Something in Jackson's gaze shifted, and for a moment, Kate glimpsed a deep well of pain. "Because once upon a time, someone should have done the same for my sister. She and her baby didn't survive the winter." The raw honesty in his voice silenced any further questions. Kate considered her options, which were few and increasingly desperate. "If I agree," she said finally, I need your word that when the time comes for me to leave, you won't try to stop me." "You have it," Jackson replied without hesitation. "I'm offering sanctuary, Kate, not a prison." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the desert landscape in hues of gold and amber, Catherine Finley made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would become, for all intents and purposes, Mrs. Jackson Farrell, a temporary fiction born of necessity and circumstance. Little did she know how difficult it would be to remember the temporary part in the days and weeks to come. The journey to Jackson's homestead took just over an hour by wagon, the rutted trail winding through scrubby desert, punctuated by the occasional juniper or mesquite. Kate sat beside him on the wagon bench, maintaining a careful distance as the horse plodded steadily onward. The silence between them was neither comfortable nor tense, simply the quiet of two strangers embarking on an unusual arrangement. As they crested a small rise, Jackson pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "It's not much, but it's home." Below them, nestled in a natural depression that offered some protection from the harsh desert winds, stood a modest homestead. The main house was constructed of adobe and timber, its walls a warm, sandy color that blended with the surrounding landscape. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, offering shade from the relentless Arizona sun. Nearby stood a barn and corral where several horses grazed in the fading light. What surprised Kate most was the splash of green surrounding the buildings, a vegetable garden, fruit trees, and even a small patch of grass, all evidence of a reliable water source, precious in this arid land. "You have water," she observed, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Jackson nodded, a smile touching his lips. "A year-round spring feeds that stream." He pointed to a silver ribbon of water cutting through the property. "It's why I chose this land. The previous settler abandoned it because he couldn't make the soil produce, but he didn't understand irrigation." As they approached, Kate noticed other details: the neat stack of firewood beside the house, the smoke curling from the chimney, the windmill turning lazily in the evening breeze. "You left a fire burning?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "No, that would be Mrs. Diaz." At Kate's questioning look, he explained, "Elena Diaz comes by 3 times a week to cook and clean. Her husband works for me occasionally when I need extra hands with the horses. They live about a mile downriver." Relief washed over Kate. Another woman's presence, even occasionally, made the arrangement seem less improper. Jackson helped her down from the wagon, careful to support her without being presumptuous. As her feet touched the ground, the front door opened, and a woman emerged, short and round, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun, her dark eyes curious but kind. "Senor Jackson, you have returned early," she said, her English accented but clear. Her gaze shifted to Kate, widening slightly at the sight of her condition. "Elena, this is Catherine," Jackson said, his voice steady. "My wife." To her credit, Elena's surprise registered only briefly before she smiled warmly. "Senora Farrell, welcome to your home. I have prepared dinner and aired out the bedroom." "Thank you," Kate managed, feeling a strange flutter in her chest at being addressed as Mrs. Farrell. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness." Elena bustled them inside, chattering about the stew she'd left simmering and how she'd need to make curtains for the nursery. Kate caught Jackson's apologetic glance as they followed the housekeeper into a surprisingly comfortable interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a solid wooden table at the other. The furniture was simple but well-crafted: a rocking chair near the hearth, a small sofa covered in faded blue fabric, shelves lined with books, and a few modest decorative items. What struck Kate most was the cleanliness and order. This was not the bachelor dwelling she had expected. "Through there is the bedroom, your bedroom now, Senora," Alina said, pointing to a doorway with a colorful woven blanket serving as a privacy curtain. "Senor Jackson has been sleeping in the small room off the kitchen." Kate glanced at Jackson questioningly. "It was originally meant to be a pantry," he explained, "but I converted it to a sleeping space years ago for when I have ranch hands staying over." After Alina departed with promises to return the next day with proper linens for the married bed, Kate sank into the rocking chair, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. "I know it's a lot to take in," Jackson said quietly, stoking the fire. "I'm sorry about Alina assuming we'd share a room. I'll explain our arrangement to her tomorrow." Kate nodded, watching him move about the space with the ease of long familiarity. "This is your home," she said. "I shouldn't displace you from your bedroom." "Nonsense. You're carrying a child, you need the proper bed." His tone brooked no argument. "I've slept in worse places than my pantry room." As they shared Alina's hearty stew at the kitchen table, Jackson outlined the practicalities of their arrangement. Alina would continue her usual duties, with additional help as Kate's time grew closer. The nearest doctor was in Kingman, but there was a midwife, Mrs. Thornton, who lived 10 miles away. "We should probably ride into town in a few days," he added. "Let people see us together, make the marriage story more believable. The land commissioner is due for his inspection in 3 weeks." Kate nodded, pushing away her empty bowl. "What will we tell people when I eventually leave?" Jackson considered this, his expression thoughtful. "That would depend on when you go. If it's after the baby, perhaps a story about visiting family back east. If it's—" He hesitated. "If something else happens, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." The unspoken possibilities hung in the air between them: illness, misfortune, or the simple decision that their arrangement wasn't working. "For now," he continued more briskly, "we should establish some basic facts about our supposed history. When did we meet? How long were we married before you came west? People will ask questions." They spent the next hour crafting a plausible backstory. A courtship in Philadelphia, 2 years prior when Jackson was there selling horses. A small wedding last autumn. Kate remaining with family while Jackson returned to establish the homestead for his bride and coming child. "You're good at this," Kate observed, surprised by his attention to detail. "Creating believable fictions." A shadow crossed his face. "Sometimes a convincing lie is the difference between survival and ruin." Before she could ask what he meant, he stood, collecting their dishes. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you to your room." The bedroom was simply furnished but comfortable: a large bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a rocking chair positioned by the window. A worn leather trunk sat at the foot of the bed. "That was my mother's," Jackson explained, nodding toward the trunk. "There might be some things inside you could use. Feel free to look through it." Kate ran her fingers along the smooth wood of the rocking chair. "This is lovely." "I made it last winter," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "Always thought it would be." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Well, it's yours to use now. The privy is out back, but there's a chamber pot under the bed for nighttime. I'll bring you fresh water for washing." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Kate!" "Yes. I know this isn't what you planned, but I hope you can find some peace here, at least for a while." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts in a stranger's bedroom that was now, at least temporarily, her own. That night, as Kate lay beneath unfamiliar blankets listening to the desert winds whisper around the eaves, she placed her hands on her swollen belly and felt her child stir within. Whatever mistakes or misfortunes had led her to this moment, she would protect this innocent life with every ounce of strength she possessed. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "Somehow, we'll find our way." In the small pantry room across the house, Jackson Farrell stared at the ceiling, wondering what twist of fate had brought a pregnant, unwed woman named Catherine Finley into his life and why, despite the rational explanation he'd given her, he'd felt so compelled to help her. Neither of them slept well that night, each acutely aware of the other's presence in what had suddenly become a shared home. The next few days established a tentative routine. Kate would wake early, finding Jackson already out tending to the horses. She'd prepare breakfast, and they would eat together in a silence that gradually became more comfortable. He would work the ranch during the day while she familiarized herself with the house and garden. In the evenings, they would share a meal and conversation, slowly learning about each other in careful, measured doses. Kate discovered that Jackson had come west from Missouri after the war, working cattle drives before saving enough to file his homestead claim. He was 32, had never been married, and possessed an unexpected knowledge of literature evidenced by his well-worn collection of books ranging from Dickens to Twain. For her part, Kate revealed that she was 24, orphaned at 16, and had supported herself as a seamstress in Philadelphia until circumstances forced her westward. She did not speak of the baby's father, and Jackson did not ask. On their fourth day together, Elena arrived with fabric for baby clothes and news that had Jackson frowning over his coffee. "Mayor Prescott is organizing a welcome dinner for the new Senora Farrell," she informed them with obvious excitement. "Next Saturday at the town hall. All the important families will attend." "That's not necessary," Kate began, but Jackson shook his head slightly. "We appreciate the town's hospitality," he told Elena. "Please thank the mayor's wife for the invitation." After Elena left to begin her housekeeping, Kate raised an eyebrow at Jackson. "A dinner in my honor seems excessive." "It's not about you," Jackson explained, his expression grim. "Prescott never does anything without ulterior motives. He's been trying to buy my water rights for 2 years. This is his way of assessing whether my marriage is genuine. You believe he suspects we're lying? I think he hopes we are." Jackson's jaw tightened. "The land commissioner is his cousin." Kate's hands instinctively went to her stomach. "So this dinner is essentially an interrogation." "More or less, will need to be convincing." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I understand if you'd rather not attend, we could claim you're unwell." She considered this, then straightened her shoulders. "No, I've spent my life letting others dictate my choices. I won't start our marriage by hiding." A smile touched the corners of Jackson's mouth. "Then, Mrs. Farrell, we'd better make sure you have a suitable dress for the occasion." 2 days later, they made their first official appearance in town as husband and wife. Jackson helped Kate into the wagon with a solicitousness that wasn't entirely feigned. Her advancing pregnancy had begun to make certain movements awkward, and they set off for Kingman under a cloudless sky. "Remember," he said as they approached the outskirts of town, "we've been married since last October. You stayed in Philadelphia with your aunt until I could prepare the homestead." Kate nodded, adjusting her bonnet. "And we met when you were in the East selling horses 2 summers ago." "That's right." Jackson glanced at her, his expression softening. "You look nice today." The simple compliment caught her off guard, warming her cheeks. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a navy blue cotton that somewhat disguised her condition, and styling her auburn hair in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. "Thank you," she replied, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I want to make a good impression." Their first stop was Whitaker's General Store, where they needed supplies and where, Jackson explained under his breath, they were guaranteed an audience. Sure enough, Mrs. Whittaker greeted them with barely concealed curiosity, her eyes darting between them as Jackson introduced Kate as his wife. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Mrs. Whittaker said, her thin lips curving in what might have been a smile. "Jackson Farrell, married and with a child on the way. The whole town's been buzzing about it." "It was a private ceremony," Kate said, adopting the soft, affectionate tone she'd practiced. "Jackson wanted to make sure our home was ready before I joined him." "How considerate," Mrs. Whittaker replied, though her tone suggested skepticism. "And when is the blessed event expected?" Before Kate could answer, Jackson slipped his arm around her waist the first time he'd touched her so intimately. "Late September, God willing. Now, if you could help us with our list, Mrs. Whittaker. Kate needs her rest." As they collected their supplies, Kate was acutely aware of Jackson's presence beside her, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the warmth of his hand at her waist when they passed other customers, the way he casually used endearments that sounded surprisingly natural coming from his lips. For his part, Jackson played the role of devoted husband with a conviction that occasionally made Kate forget they were play-acting. He insisted she sit while he loaded their purchases, brought her water when she looked flushed, and even tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that startled them both. By the time they reached the dressmaker's shop, Kate was flustered in a way that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. The performative intimacy, necessary for their charade, had awakened sensations she'd thought herself immune to after her previous experience with men. Mrs. Sanderson, the dressmaker, was a plump, cheerful woman who clapped her hands in delight at the prospect of creating a dinner dress for the new Mrs. Farrell. "Something in green, I think," she declared, assessing Kate's coloring, "to bring out those lovely eyes of yours. And we can design it to accommodate your condition while still being fashionable." As Mrs. Sanderson took her measurements, chattering about the upcoming dinner, Kate caught Jackson watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. When their eyes met, he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. "You'll be the most beautiful woman there," he said, his voice carrying just enough for Mrs. Sanderson to hear and sigh approvingly. By the time they headed back to the homestead, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the desert landscape in rich oranges and purples. Kate sat closer to Jackson on the return journey, the day's pretense having somehow diminished the careful distance they usually maintained. "You're very good at this," she commented as the town disappeared behind them, playing the besotted husband. Jackson kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "It's not difficult when you have such a convincing partner." Something in his tone made Kate study his profile, wondering if there was more to his words than simple compliment. "Do you think they believed us?" "Most did," he replied. "Mrs. Whittaker's suspicious by nature, but even she seemed convinced by the end." He glanced at her, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "You were quite impressive yourself, Mrs. Farrell," Kate laughed, surprising herself with the genuine sound. "Well, my mother always said I had a talent for theatrics." "Tell me about her," Jackson said, his expression turning thoughtful. "Your mother." The request caught Kate off guard. They had shared practical information but had carefully avoided personal histories beyond what was necessary for their cover story. "She was beautiful," Kate said after a moment. Not in the conventional way, perhaps, but she had this presence, a warmth that drew people to her. She was a seamstress, too, taught me everything I know about fabric and stitching. "And your father?" Kate's expression clouded. "He left when I was 7. Headed west, ironically enough, seeking gold or adventure or whatever men tell themselves when they abandon their families." Jackson nodded, his jaw tightening. Some men don't deserve the title of father. Something in his tone made Kate wonder about his own history, but before she could ask, he continued, "My father was a farrier, worked with horses all his life, taught me everything about them. He died in the war fighting for the Union." "I'm sorry," Kate said softly. Jackson shrugged, though the casual gesture didn't match the shadow in his eyes. "It was a long time ago. My mother followed 5 years later, heart troubles." "And your sister," Kate ventured, remembering his earlier mention. Jackson's hands tightened on the reins. "Lily was younger than me by 6 years. Sweet-natured, always seeing the best in people." He paused, and Kate could sense him deciding how much to share. "She fell in love with a traveling salesman who promised marriage once he'd established himself in California. When she discovered she was with child, he was long gone." "What happened to her?" Kate asked gently, though she suspected she knew the answer from what he'd mentioned at their first meeting. "Our neighbors turned their backs on her. The church she'd attended all her life asked her not to return. She tried to make her way to find me. I was working a cattle drive at the time. Winter came early that year." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. "A family found her frozen beside the trail. She tried to shelter her newborn son inside her coat, but it wasn't enough. The wagon hit a rut in the trail, jostling them, but Kate barely noticed." She placed her hand lightly on Jackson's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I'm so sorry, Jackson." He nodded once, sharp and final. "That's why I couldn't just walk away when I saw you at the station. Maybe I couldn't save Lily, but I could offer you shelter, at least." The simple, honest admission hung between them as the wagon continued its steady progress toward the homestead. In the fading light, Kate studied the man beside her with new understanding. His kindness wasn't merely circumstantial, it was born of loss and regret. A determination that another woman and child would not suffer the same fate as his sister. As the homestead came into view, silhouetted against the twilight sky, Kate realized that their arrangement had shifted subtly, but significantly. They were no longer simply strangers bound by a convenient lie. They were two wounded souls who had recognized in each other, a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss and loneliness, and the desperate measures sometimes required to survive. Whether this new understanding would strengthen their charade or complicate it remained to be seen. But as Jackson helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands gentle at her waist, Kate felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The fragile, tentative stirring of trust. The evening of the welcome dinner arrived more quickly than Kate would have liked. Standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, she smoothed her hands over the emerald green silk of her new dress. Mrs. Sanderson had outdone herself, creating a gown that was both fashionable and flattering, with clever pleating that accommodated her pregnancy without drawing undue attention to it. A soft knock at the door preceded Jackson's voice. "Kate, are you ready? We should leave soon if we want to be on time." "Come in," she called, turning to face him as he entered. Jackson stopped in the doorway, his expression changing from practical to something more complex as he took in her appearance. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his gaze traveling from her carefully arranged hair to the elegant cut of her dress. "You look." He cleared his throat. "You're beautiful, Kate." The simple sincerity in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. Jackson himself was a sight to behold, having traded his usual working clothes for a well-cut black suit, white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Farrell," she said, trying for a light tone despite the sudden flutter of her pulse. He smiled, the expression softening his features. "High praise from my discerning wife." He approached, holding out a small wooden box. "I have something for you." Kate took the box with curious fingers. Inside, nestled on a scrap of faded velvet, lay a simple gold band. "My mother's wedding ring," Jackson explained. "I thought it might help make our story more convincing." Kate lifted the delicate band, turning it in the lamplight. "Are you sure? This is a family heirloom." "I'm sure," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "She would have wanted it to be used." Their fingers brushed as he took the ring and gently slid it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "There," he said, his gaze lingering on their joined hands. "Now you truly look the part of Mrs. Farrell." The weight of the ring was unfamiliar but not unwelcome, a tangible symbol of their increasingly complex arrangement. Kate looked up to find Jackson watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We should go," she said softly, breaking the moment before it could deepen into something neither of them was prepared to acknowledge. Jackson nodded, offering his arm with a courtly gesture that made her smile despite her nerves. "Shall we face the lions together, Mrs. Farrell?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns casting a warm glow over tables draped in white cloth and adorned with wildflowers. Nearly every prominent citizen of Kingman had turned out for the event, their curious gazes following Kate and Jackson as Mayor Prescott led them to the head table. "The guests of honor have arrived," the mayor announced, raising his glass. "Let us welcome Mrs. Catherine Farrell to our community." Kate managed a gracious smile as Jackson held her chair, acutely aware of the scrutiny they were under. Mrs. Prescott, a thin woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, immediately began a subtle interrogation disguised as polite conversation. "How wonderful that you could travel in your condition," she said, her gaze flickering to Kate's midsection. "Most doctors advise against it. My physician felt the benefits of joining my husband outweighed the risks," Kate replied smoothly. "And the journey proved uneventful, thankfully." "Such devotion," Mrs. Prescott murmured. "Tell us, how did you and Jackson meet? He's been so reticent about his personal life." Jackson reached for Kate's hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring in a gesture that appeared habitual but sent a shiver up her arm. "Kate was commissioned to make shirts for a business associate of mine in Philadelphia," he said, the story they had rehearsed flowing naturally. "When I went to collect them, she was the one who assisted me." "He kept finding reasons to return," Kate added, allowing a small, secretive smile to play at her lips. "Always claiming some flaw in the stitching, though his real interest seemed to be in the seamstress rather than her work." The tale elicited appreciative chuckles from those nearby, including Judge Willis and his wife, who sat across from them. "A true romance," Mrs. Willis sighed. "And when did you marry?" "October last," Jackson answered. "A small ceremony with Kate's family. I had to return to the homestead shortly after, but we agreed Kate would join me once I had everything properly prepared for a family." "How considerate," Mrs. Prescott said, her tone suggesting she found the story suspiciously perfect. "And the baby is due." "September," Kate replied, meeting the woman's probing gaze steadily. "Our first anniversary gift to each other, it seems." As the evening progressed, Kate found herself increasingly comfortable in her role as Jackson's wife. They moved through the dinner with a synchronicity that belied their short acquaintance, anticipating each other's needs and building on each other's stories with remarkable ease. When the tables were cleared for dancing, Jackson led Kate to the floor for a slow waltz, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured as they moved carefully to the music. "They're convinced." Kate wasn't entirely certain that was true. She'd caught skeptical glances from several quarters, but the validation warmed her nonetheless. We make a convincing couple. It's easy with the right partner, he replied, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her miss a step. Jackson steadied her immediately, concern replacing whatever had been in his eyes a moment before. Are you all right? We don't have to dance. I'm fine, she assured him. Just a little tired, he nodded, guiding her toward the edge of the floor. Let's get you some air. The night was pleasantly cool after the warmth of the hall, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They stood on the small porch, Jackson's jacket draped around Kate's shoulders to ward off the chill. Thank you for this, she said after a comfortable silence. For everything, really. Jackson shook his head. No need for thanks. You've held up your end admirably. Before she could respond, the door opened behind them and Judge Willis stepped out, pipe in hand. Ah, the happy couple, he said, striking a match. Taking a respite from the festivities. Fresh air for the mother-to-be, Jackson explained, his arm slipping naturally around Kate's shoulders. The judge nodded, puffing his pipe to life. A wise precaution. My Sarah was the same way with our first. He regarded them thoughtfully through a cloud of sweet-smelling smoke. Farrell, I've been meaning to tell you the land commissioner mentioned your claim when we spoke last week. Jackson tensed beside her. Is that so? Seems Prescott's been in his ear about certain homesteaders not fulfilling the residence requirements. The judge's tone was carefully neutral. But I reminded him that married men with families are generally considered permanent settlers, regardless of business travel. I appreciate that, Your Honor, Jackson said. Judge Willis waved away the thanks. Just stating facts. Besides, anyone who sees you two together would be hard-pressed to question the legitimacy of your settlement intentions. He smiled around his pipe stem. You remind me of Sarah and myself 40 years ago. Can't keep your eyes off each other. Kate felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. Jackson's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. Kate is easy to look at, he said, the simple compliment delivered with such genuine warmth that Kate's heart skipped. The judge chuckled. Indeed she is, Farrell. You're a fortunate man. He tapped out his pipe against the railing. Well, I should rejoin the party before Sarah sends a search party. Don't stay out here too long. These desert nights can turn cold quickly. Once they were alone again, Kate became acutely aware of Jackson's arm still around her shoulders, the solid warmth of his body beside hers. The judge seems to be on our side, she observed, reluctant to break the moment but needing to fill the charged silence. Jackson nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains. Willis is a good man, fair, not in Prescott's pocket like some in this town. Do you think the land commissioner will approve your claim, with you by my side? His voice had softened, and when he looked down at her, something in his expression made her breath catch. I'm starting to believe anything is possible. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Kate found herself leaning slightly into his embrace, drawn by something she wasn't ready to name. The hall door swung open again, spilling light and laughter onto the porch as several couples emerged. The spell broken, Jackson stepped back, though his hand remained at the small of her back, a gesture that could be interpreted as either protective or possessive. We should probably head home soon, he said, his voice returning to its normal register. It's getting late and you need your rest. Kate nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. As they made their farewells and began the journey home under the star-filled sky, she wondered if Jackson felt it too, this gradual, dangerous blurring of the lines between pretense and reality. More troubling still was the realization that she wasn't entirely displeased by the development. The weeks following the dinner settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Each morning, Kate would wake to find coffee brewing and Jackson already tending to the horses. They would share breakfast, discussing the day ahead with the comfortable familiarity of a long-established couple. During the day, Kate helped with household tasks as her energy allowed, took up sewing projects, and even began preparing a small room adjacent to the bedroom as a nursery. Jackson worked the ranch, breaking new horses and tending to the small herd he was cultivating. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch or by the fire, reading or talking until the hour grew late. Sometimes their conversations were light childhood memories or amusing anecdotes, while other times they ventured into deeper territory, sharing hopes and fears in the safety of growing trust. They were careful never to discuss the inevitable end of their arrangement, as though by tacit agreement they had decided to live fully in the present, neither looking too far backward nor forward. The land commissioner's visit came and went without incident. The portly official had spent a day inspecting the homestead improvements. Nodding approvingly at the irrigation system, Jackson had engineered and commenting favorably on the domestic touches that Kate had added to the home. "Your claim looks to be in order, Farrell," he had pronounced before departing. "Continuous residence and meaningful improvements, that's what the law requires, and that's what I see here. You'll receive official confirmation within the month." That night, they had celebrated with a bottle of good whiskey Jackson had been saving for a special occasion. Kate had allowed herself a small glass, clinking it against his in a toast to their successful deception. "To partnerships," Jackson had said, his eyes warm in the firelight. "To new beginnings," Kate had replied, feeling oddly melancholy despite their victory. Now, as July blazed into August, Kate found herself facing the reality that her time at the homestead with Jackson was growing short. The baby would arrive in a matter of weeks, and their agreement would reach its natural conclusion once she had recovered enough to travel. Where she would go, she hadn't decided. The money she had saved before leaving Philadelphia would provide a modest start somewhere, perhaps in California, as she'd originally planned. Jackson had generously insisted she keep the wages he'd been paying her for her household contributions, giving her a slightly larger cushion. Yet the thought of leaving filled her with a peculiar dread that had nothing to do with practical concerns. Somewhere along the way, the homestead had become home, and Jackson had become far more than a convenient guardian. On a particularly hot August afternoon, Kate sat in the shade of the porch, working on a tiny gown for the baby. The repetitive motion of the needle was soothing, allowing her mind to wander as she watched Jackson in the corral, working with a spirited young mare. His patience with the animal was remarkably firm, but never harsh, insistent but respectful of the horse's spirit. She had seen that same careful consideration in his interactions with her, never presuming, always allowing her space and agency while providing steady support. It was a quality she had never encountered in a man before, and it had gradually dismantled the walls she had built around her heart after her disastrous involvement with Charles Pembroke. The memory of Charles still stung, though less sharply now. The son of a wealthy Philadelphia merchant, he had pursued her with charming persistence, promising marriage once his father approved. Kate, naive and dazzled by attention from someone of his social standing, had allowed herself to believe in the fantasy he painted. When she had discovered she was with child and joyfully shared the news, expecting a hastened wedding, his true character had emerged. "Don't be absurd," he had said, his handsome face twisted with disdain. "I can't marry a seamstress. My father would disown me." When she had pointed out that he should have considered that before taking her to his bed, his expression had turned ugly. "A woman of your station should be grateful for the attention," not demanding permanence. Besides, how can I be certain the child is even mine? The cruel questioning of her virtue, when he had been her first and only lover, had been the final blow. Kate had fled Philadelphia the following week, unable to bear the shame of facing her colleagues and the few friends she had once Charles's rejection became known. Now, watching Jackson work with quiet competence, she couldn't help but compare the two men. Where Charles had been all polished words and empty promises, Jackson was actions and steadfast reliability. Where Charles had abandoned his responsibility at the first inconvenience, Jackson had taken on a burden that wasn't even his to bear, and therein lay the problem. The baby Kate carried was not Jackson's responsibility. Their arrangement, however comfortable it had become, had been born of mutual necessity, not genuine commitment. She had no right to expect or hope for more, especially given her circumstances. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting her melancholy thoughts. Kate set aside her sewing to press her hand against the spot, smiling despite herself at the strong movement. Jackson looked up at that moment, catching her smile. He raised a hand in greeting, his own expression warming in response. The simple exchange sent a familiar flutter through her chest, a sensation she had been experiencing with increasing frequency. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the desert in fiery hues, Jackson broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "Have you decided where you'll go after?" Kate's hands stilled on her knitting. They so rarely acknowledged the temporary nature of their situation that the question caught her off guard. "I haven't settled on a place yet," she answered carefully. "Perhaps California, as I originally planned." Jackson nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "California's growing fast. Good opportunities there." "So I've heard." Kate resumed her knitting, the click of the needles filling the silence. "The land commissioner's confirmation came today," she added, changing the subject. "Your claim is secure now." "Yes." He took a sip from his coffee cup. "Thanks in no small part to you." Kate shook her head. "I merely played a role. You did all the real work, building this place from nothing." "Don't diminish your contribution," Jackson said, his voice taking on an edge she rarely heard. "This house wasn't a home until you came." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, hung between them in the gathering dusk. Kate set aside her knitting, uncertain how to respond. "Jackson, Mrs. Thornton should check on you soon," he interrupted, suddenly businesslike. "The baby could come early, especially with first-time mothers." Kate nodded, accepting the change in subject. "I'll speak with Alina about sending word to her tomorrow." They lapsed into silence again, though this one held a tension that hadn't been present before. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Kate found herself wishing she could read Jackson's thoughts to know if he ever wondered, as she increasingly did, what might have been if they had met under different circumstances, if the child she carried had been his. The thought sent heat rushing to her face, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. Such musings were dangerous and pointless. Their paths had crossed by chance, their lives temporarily entwined by necessity. When the time came, they would separate, each continuing on their predetermined course. That was the agreement. That was what made sense. So why did the prospect fill her with such profound sadness? As August stretched into September, the heat remained relentless during the day, though the nights began to cool pleasantly. Kate's mobility became increasingly limited as her time grew near, her body heavy and unwieldy with the child who seemed determined to make his or her presence known through constant, vigorous movement. Jackson had taken to sleeping in the main room rather than his small pantry room, concerned that Kate might need assistance during the night. Though she had protested this arrangement initially, she found herself grateful for his proximity when she woke one night to sharp, cramping pains that left her gasping. "Jackson," she called, her voice tight with anxiety. He appeared in the doorway almost instantly, hair rumpled from sleep but eyes alert. "What is it? Is it time?" Kate nodded, gripping the edge of the bed as another contraction seized her. "I think so, but it's too early. Mrs. Thornton isn't due to check on me until next week." "I'll send for her right away," Jackson said, already pulling on his boots. He paused, coming to kneel beside the bed, his expression a mixture of concern and reassurance. "How far apart are the pains?" "Still some time between them," Kate managed, breathing through the fading contraction. "Maybe 20 minutes," he nodded. "Good. That gives us time. I'll wake Alina and Manuel. They arrived last night to help with the harvest. Alina can stay with you while I ride for Mrs. Thornton." "Be careful," Kate said, sudden fear gripping her at the thought of him riding through the dark desert. "The trails are treacherous at night." Jackson's expression softened, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch gentle. "Don't worry about me. I know every inch of this land, day or night." The next hours passed in a blur of increasing pain and focused determination. Alina proved a competent assistant, her calm presence a balm to Kate's frayed nerves as the contractions intensified and drew closer together. "You are doing well, Senora," she encouraged, bathing Kate's forehead with a cool cloth. "The baby is eager to meet you, that is all." Kate managed a weak smile, grateful for the woman's steadying presence, but increasingly anxious about Jackson's return. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard sent a wave of relief through her, only to be followed by disappointment when Manuel appeared in the doorway instead of Jackson. "Senor Jackson sent me ahead," he explained, removing his hat respectfully. "The midwife will arrive soon. He is bringing her in the wagon for greater comfort." The news was reassuring, but as the night deepened and the pain became nearly unbearable, Kate found herself calling for Jackson in moments of weakness. Whether it was the delirium of labor or some deeper truth breaking through, she could not say, but his name became a talisman on her lips. When he finally arrived with Mrs. Thornton, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky with delicate pinks and golds. Kate was too far gone in the throes of labor to register much beyond the midwife's capable hands and Jackson's steadfast presence, just outside the bedroom door. "Jackson," she cried during a particularly vicious contraction. "Jackson, I can't," and then he was there, propriety forgotten as he knelt beside the bed, taking her hand in his strong, calloused one. "You can," he told her, his voice low and certain. "You're the strongest woman I know, Kate Finley. You can do this." The use of her real surname, not the borrowed Farrell, somehow grounded her, reminding her of who she was and what she had already survived. Drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, Kate bore down with renewed determination. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, a new cry joined the dawn chorus, lusty and indignant, announcing the arrival of new life with unmistakable vigor. "A boy," Mrs. Thornton announced, her weathered face creasing in a smile as she expertly cleaned and swaddled the infant. "A fine, strong boy." Kate collapsed against the pillows, exhausted but exhilarated as the midwife placed the tiny bundle in her arms. Through tears of joy and relief, she studied her son's perfect features, the shock of dark hair, the miniature fingers curled into tight fists, the rosebud mouth that had already demonstrated impressive lung capacity. "He's beautiful," Jackson said softly from beside her, his voice thick with emotion. "Like his mother." Kate looked up to find his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed at the child. Without thinking, she shifted slightly, making room beside her. "Would you like to hold him?" Jackson hesitated, then sat carefully on the edge of the bed, accepting the swaddled infant with reverent hands. The sight of her son cradled so tenderly in those strong arms made Kate's heart contract painfully. "Hello, little man," Jackson murmured, one finger gently tracing the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world." The baby's eyes fluttered open dark blue, as all newborns were seeming to focus on Jackson's face with surprising intensity. One tiny hand escaped the swaddling, fingers splaying before curling around Jackson's finger with surprising strength. The look of wonder on Jackson's face was almost Kate's undoing. This man who had no obligation to her or her child was looking at her son as though he were a miracle, which, of course, he was. "What will you name him?" Jackson asked, his gaze still fixed on the infant. Kate had considered various names during her pregnancy, but had never settled on one. Now, watching her son and this good man who had protected them both, she knew. "Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas Jackson Finley." Jackson's head jerked up, his eyes meeting hers with a question he didn't voice. "If that's all right," Kate added, suddenly uncertain. To honor the man who gave him shelter when the world would have turned its back. For a long moment, Jackson said nothing, his expression so complex that Kate couldn't begin to decipher it. Then he nodded, a single sharp movement, his throat working as he swallowed. "It would be my honor," he said finally, his voice rough. "Thomas is a good, strong name." Mrs. Thornton, who had been discreetly tidying the room, approached with a cup of herbal tea for Kate. "You need to rest now, Mrs. Farrell. Your body has done remarkable work today." Kate accepted the tea gratefully, her eyelids already growing heavy with exhaustion. Jackson carefully returned baby Thomas to her arms, his hands lingering for just a moment as their fingers brushed. "Rest," he echoed the midwife's advice. "I'll be close if you need anything." As sleep claimed her, Kate's last conscious thought was that she had never felt so complete, so at peace, as she did in that moment with her son in her arms and Jackson Farrell watching over them both. The days following Thomas's birth took on a dreamlike quality for Kate. The exhaustion of childbirth combined with the demanding schedule of a newborn left her in a state of pleasant disorientation, where time seemed to flow differently and the outside world receded in importance. Jackson proved an unexpected source of support during this period, though he maintained a respectful distance, allowing Kate the privacy and space she needed for recovery. He was constantly attentive to her needs and those of the baby. He ensured that fresh water was always available, that meals appeared when she was hungry, and that the house remained quiet during Thomas's brief periods of sleep. More surprisingly, he showed no hesitation in helping with the baby himself. He would offer to hold Thomas while Kate ate or bathed, his large hands cradling the infant with surprising expertise. "You seem comfortable with babies," Kate observed one evening as Jackson walked the length of the main room, Thomas snuggled against his shoulder. He glanced up, a small smile playing at his lips. "Neighbors had 5 children when I was growing up. I was often recruited for holding duty." The domesticity of their arrangement deepened with each passing day. Where before they had maintained certain boundaries, careful not to intrude too much on each other's private spaces or moments, now those lines blurred naturally, as they moved around each other in the shared task of caring for the newest member of their household. By the time Thomas was 2 weeks old, they had settled into routines that felt as natural as breathing. Jackson would take the baby for the early morning hours, allowing Kate to get much-needed sleep. She would handle the midday feeds and care, while evenings found them often sitting together on the porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully in the cradle Jackson had crafted during her pregnancy. It was during one of these quiet twilight moments that Kate finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. I should start thinking about moving on, she said softly, her gaze on the distant mountains rather than Jackson's face. Thomas is strong, and I'm recovering well. Another week or two, and we should be fit to travel. The silence that followed her statement seemed to stretch into infinity. When Jackson finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. There's no rush, Kate. Winter will be here soon. Spring would be a better time for travel with an infant. The reasonable suggestion held a lifeline she was tempted to grasp. A reprieve until spring would mean months more in this place that had become home with this man who had become. What exactly? That's generous of you, she said, matching his neutral tone. But I've imposed on your kindness long enough. Our agreement was until the baby came and I recovered. Jackson's jaw tightened visibly. It's not an imposition. He paused, then added more quietly, I've grown accustomed to having you both here. The simple admission hung between them, pregnant with possibilities neither seemed ready to articulate. Kate's heart stuttered in her chest, hope and fear warring within her. Jackson, she began, not entirely sure what she intended to say. The baby's cry from inside the house interrupted whatever might have followed. Kate rose quickly, grateful for the reprieve from a conversation she wasn't prepared to continue. I should feed him, she said, not meeting Jackson's eyes as she hurried inside. That night, as she nursed Thomas in the quiet of her bedroom, Kate allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. Somewhere along the way, what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had transformed into something far more complex and precious. She had fallen in love with Jackson Farrell. The realization should have terrified her. After Charles's betrayal, she had sworn never to trust a man with her heart again. Yet here she was, her defenses thoroughly dismantled by a quiet cowboy with gentle hands and unwavering integrity. But what of Jackson's feelings? He had shown her kindness, respect, and even affection of a sort. He clearly adored Thomas, his eyes softening whenever he held the baby. But was that enough to build a life upon? Or was she once again seeing what she wanted to see, constructing a fantasy of belonging that would crumble at the first test? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Kate was hanging laundry in the yard, Thomas sleeping contentedly in a basket nearby, when a smart buggy appeared on the road leading to the homestead. As it drew closer, she recognized Mayor Prescott's wife, her expression unreadable behind a small pair of spectacles. Mrs. Prescott, Kate greeted her, wiping her hands on her apron. What a surprise! Mrs. Farrell, the older woman replied, her gaze moving to the basket. I see congratulations are in order. The ladies of the church society thought you might appreciate some assistance now that your blessed event has arrived. The thin smile accompanying the words did little to disguise what was essentially a reconnaissance mission. Kate had no doubt that curiosity, rather than Christian charity, had prompted this visit. How thoughtful, she replied, maintaining her composure. Please, come inside out of the heat. I'll put on some coffee. As they settled at the kitchen table, Mrs. Prescott's sharp eyes took in every detail of the home, the modest but comfortable furnishings, the touches Kate had added over the past months, the cradle in the corner. A boy, I understand, Mrs. Prescott asked, accepting a cup of coffee. Yes, Thomas, Kate replied, allowing genuine maternal pride to warm her voice. Named for my father. Mrs. Prescott nodded, sipping her coffee. A fine family name. And how is married life treating you, my dear? Jackson has always been such a solitary figure in our community. The subtle probing was expected, but Kate found herself bristling at the implied criticism of Jackson. Marriage suits us both very well, she said firmly. Jackson is an excellent husband and already a devoted father. I'm glad to hear it, Mrs. Prescott set down her cup, her expression calculating. Though I must say, we were all quite surprised by his sudden marriage. Jackson never mentioned a sweetheart back east in all his years here. Some men prefer to keep their private lives private, Kate countered, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. Indeed. Mrs. Prescott's thin lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. Though it's curious that your child arrived seemingly early for an October wedding. Unless, of course, the wedding date we were told was not accurate. The implication was clear. Mrs. Prescott was questioning the timeline of their supposed marriage and, by extension, the legitimacy of their child. Kate felt heat rise to her face, anger rather than embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the doorway. Mrs. Prescott, Jackson's deep voice held a note of steel beneath its polite surface. What an unexpected pleasure. He moved to stand beside Kate's chair, one hand coming to rest lightly on her shoulder in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. The touch steadied her, reminding her that she wasn't facing this inquisition alone. I was just admiring your lovely wife and new son, Mrs. Prescott said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Such a blessing after your whirlwind courtship. A blessing indeed, Jackson agreed, his tone mild though Kate could feel the tension in his fingers. Though I wouldn't call 2 years of courtship particularly whirlwind. Oh, Mrs. Prescott's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. I was under the impression you had only known Catherine for a short time before your marriage. A common misunderstanding, Jackson replied smoothly. I've been traveling to Philadelphia on horse business for several years. Kate and I met during my first trip east, though it took me some time to convince her that Arizona territory wasn't the wilderness she imagined. The practiced lie rolled off his tongue with such conviction that even Kate almost believed it. She reached up to cover his hand with hers, leaning slightly into his solid presence. Jackson can be very persuasive when he sets his mind to something, she added, allowing a touch of genuine affection to color her tone. Mrs. Prescott looked between them, her expression suggesting she wasn't entirely convinced but could find no obvious holes in their story. The baby chose that moment to wake, his demanding cry filling the kitchen. If you'll excuse me, Kate said, rising to retrieve her son. The interruption effectively ended the interrogation. Within minutes, Mrs. Prescott was making her excuses to leave, though not before delivering what was ostensibly the purpose of her visit, an invitation to the Harvest Festival the following weekend. The whole town will be there, she emphasized. It would be the perfect opportunity to introduce your son to the community. Once the buggy had disappeared down the road, Kate turned to find Jackson leaning against the doorframe, his expression troubled. I'm sorry you had to face that, he said, his gaze following the dust trail left by Mrs. Prescott's departure. Prescott and his wife never did believe our story. It doesn't matter what they believe, Kate replied, surprised by how little she cared about the opinion of Kingman's social arbiters. We know the truth. Jackson's gaze shifted to her, something unreadable in his eyes. And what is the truth, Kate? The question hung between them, weighted with meanings that extended far beyond their fabricated marriage. Kate found herself at a crossroads, uncertain whether to retreat into the safety of their established boundaries or to step boldly toward what her heart increasingly desired. Before she could decide, Thomas's cries intensified, demanding immediate attention. The moment passed, the question unanswered as Kate turned to tend to her son, but the query lingered in her mind throughout the day and into the night. What was the truth of what existed between them? And more importantly, what truth did she want to create for her future and for Thomas's? The Harvest Festival arrived on a perfect autumn day. the desert heat finally giving way to the gentler warmth of early October. The town square had been transformed with lanterns, bunting, and tables laden with the community's bounty. Children darted between hay bales and apple bobbing stations, while musicians tuned their instruments on a small wooden platform. Kate felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation as Jackson helped her down from the wagon, Thomas securely bundled in her arms. This would be their first public appearance since the baby's birth, and possibly their last as a family, if she held to her plan of departing before winter. "Ready?" Jackson asked softly, offering his arm. She nodded, adjusting Thomas's blanket. The baby was alert, his eyes now showing hints of staying dark, rather than changing to a lighter color, taking in the colorful scene with apparent fascination. Their entrance drew the expected attention. Women clustered around Kate, cooing over Thomas and offering unsolicited advice about infant care. Men clapped Jackson on the back, congratulating him on his son with knowing winks and comments about sleepless nights. Through it all, Jackson remained close to Kate's side, a steady presence that anchored her amid the swirl of social interactions. When Mrs. Prescott approached with several church ladies in tow, clearly intent on further investigation, he smoothly intercepted them. "Ladies, would you excuse us? I promised my wife a dance before the music ends." Before Kate could protest that dancing was the last thing on her mind, Jackson had guided her and Thomas to a quiet corner near the musicians' platform. A lively reel was just ending, with couples laughing breathlessly as they separated. "You don't actually have to dance," Jackson murmured, his eyes crinkling with amusement. It was just the first excuse that came to mind. Kate laughed, the tension she'd been carrying easing somewhat. A gallant rescue nonetheless. Mrs. Prescott looked positively thwarted. "She'll recover," Jackson replied dryly. "Though I suspect we haven't heard the last of her theories about our hasty marriage." The musicians struck up a slower tune, a waltz that had several couples moving onto the makeshift dance floor. Jackson watched them for a moment, then turned to Kate with an unexpected question. "Would you like to dance? For real this time?" Kate glanced down at Thomas, who had fallen asleep in the warm afternoon sun. "I can't with the baby, I'll take him." The offer came from Mrs. Holloway, the cafe owner who had approached unnoticed. "I've raised 6 of my own, Mrs. Farrell. I think I can manage this little angel for one dance." Before Kate could formulate an objection, Mrs. Holloway had expertly transferred Thomas from her arms, settling the sleeping infant against her ample bosom with practiced ease. "Go on," she encouraged with a warm smile. "Young parents need moments to remember they are more than just mama and papa." With Thomas safely settled, Kate had no reasonable excuse to decline. She placed her hand in Jackson's outstretched one, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. The moment his arm slipped around her waist, drawing her into the proper position for a waltz, Kate felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the man himself. They had maintained careful physical boundaries throughout their arrangement, with only occasional necessary touches. Now, the solid warmth of his hand at her waist and the gentle pressure of his other hand holding hers sent heat spreading through her body. "I didn't know you could dance," she said, trying to distract herself from her body's reaction to his proximity. Jackson smiled, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like an untrained mule." The image made Kate laugh, relaxing into his lead as they moved in perfect synchronicity to the music. "She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," Jackson agreed, a fond smile softening his features. "You would have liked her, I think, and she would have adored you." The simple statement, delivered without artifice or agenda, caught at Kate's heart. It was one thing to fabricate a marriage for practicality's sake. It was quite another to imagine her fitting into the reality of Jackson's family had circumstances been different. "Tell me more about her," Kate requested, genuinely curious about the woman who had raised such a good man. As they danced, Jackson shared stories of his mother, her determination to maintain civility and culture on the frontier, her talent for coaxing gardens from reluctant soil, her unshakable faith in the goodness of people despite life's disappointments. "You have her strength," he concluded as the music began to fade, "and her kindness." Kate looked up to find his gaze on her, warm and intent in a way that made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, the crowd around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared understanding. The spell was broken by enthusiastic applause as the music ended. Jackson released her, though his hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, putting a respectable distance between them. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Farrell," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone and carrying a warmth that had nothing to do with their public performance. "The pleasure was mine, Mr. Farrell," she replied, meaning it more than she dared admit, as they reclaimed Thomas from Mrs. Holloway and made their rounds through the festival. Kate found herself studying Jackson with new eyes. The easy way he greeted neighbors, the genuine interest he showed in their concerns, the respectful deference he offered to the town elders all spoke of a man deeply integrated into this community, despite his somewhat solitary nature. More compelling still was the way he interacted with Thomas. When the baby grew fussy in the late afternoon heat, Jackson took him without hesitation, his large hand supporting the infant's head with natural ease as he walked to a shaded area, murmuring soothing nonsense that soon had Thomas quieting. It was this sight, Jackson Farrell cradling her son with such tenderness, that finally crystallized Kate's feelings beyond any doubt or reservation. She loved this man, not out of gratitude or circumstance or convenience, but for the person he was, honorable, kind, steady, and true. The revelation should have been frightening, given her history and vulnerability. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey, a recognition rather than a discovery. The question that remained, the one that kept her awake long after they had returned to the homestead and the household had settled for the night, was whether Jackson could ever feel the same way about a woman who had arrived on his doorstep pregnant with another man's child. And more importantly, whether she had the courage to find out before it was too late. The answer came 3 days later, in the middle of an argument about firewood. "You're being ridiculous," Kate said, exasperation coloring her tone as she faced Jackson across the kitchen table. "I am perfectly capable of bringing in kindling for the stove." "I didn't say you weren't capable," Jackson replied, his own frustration evident in the tight set of his jaw. "I said there's no need when I can easily do it before I leave for the day. And I said I don't need to be treated like an invalid." Kate planted her hands on her hips, aware she was being somewhat unreasonable but unable to stop herself. "Thomas is almost a month old, and I've been up and about for weeks. I'm not some delicate flower that will wilt at the first sign of exertion." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "I know that, Kate, but there's a difference between recovery and pushing yourself unnecessarily." "Carrying kindling is hardly pushing myself," she countered. "It is when you're also caring for a newborn, managing the household, and preparing for a journey you don't need to take." The last part burst from him with unexpected force, his eyes widening slightly as if surprised by his own vehemence. Kate stared at him, momentarily speechless. In all their months together, Jackson had never raised his voice, had never displayed anything but measured control. "What did you say?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson's expression shifted, frustration giving way to something more vulnerable, more raw. "You don't need to leave, Kate. Not now, not ever if you don't want to." The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with implications neither had dared voice until now. "Jackson," Kate began, her heart hammering in her chest. "Our arrangement was temporary. The land claim is secure, Thomas is healthy, I'm recovered. There's no reason for me to stay." "There is." He took a step toward her, then stopped as if uncertain of his welcome. "If you want there to be," Kate's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Jackson paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I'm saying that what began as an arrangement has become something else entirely, at least for me. I'm saying that the thought of you and Thomas leaving tears at my heart in ways I can't explain." He met her gaze directly, his hazel eyes filled with an emotion she had seen glimpses of, but never so openly displayed. "I'm saying I love you, Kate Finley. I love you, and I love that boy as if he were my own flesh and blood." The declaration, so plainly stated yet so profound, left Kate momentarily speechless. Joy and disbelief warred within her, along with a reflexive fear born of past betrayal. "You can't mean that," she said finally, hating the tremor in her voice. "You've been kind, generous beyond measure, but love, Jackson, I came to you pregnant with another man's child. Do you think I don't know that?" A hint of frustration returned to his tone. "Do you think it matters to me? Thomas is part of you, Kate, and I fell in love with all of you." "When?" The question escaped before she could consider it. "When did you?" A small smile touched Jackson's lips. "I think it started the moment you stepped off that train, looking so brave and so alone. But I knew for certain the day Thomas was born, when you gave him my name as his middle name." His voice softened. "No one has ever honored me that way." Kate's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "I never meant for this to happen," she admitted. "I came here determined never to trust a man again, never to be vulnerable. But you—" she shook her head, a watery laugh escaping. "You made it impossible not to love you, Jackson Farrell." For a heartbeat, Jackson remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with two swift strides, he closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his obvious emotion. "Say that again," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Kate tilted her face up to his, allowing him to see the truth in her eyes. "I love you. I've loved you for months, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." Jackson's hand came up to cradle her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "No more fear," he said softly. "No more pretending. Be my wife, Kate, my real wife. Let me be Thomas's father in every way that matters." The proposal, so heartfelt in its simplicity, was everything Kate had secretly longed for but had not dared to hope might be possible. "Are you sure?" she asked, needing his absolute certainty. "I don't want your pity or your sense of obligation." "Pity?" Jackson's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Kate, you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You don't need anyone's pity, least of all mine." His expression softened into a smile that warmed her from within. "As for obligation, the only one I feel is to my own heart, which has been yours since you agreed to my ridiculous proposal at the train station." A cry from the bedroom interrupted whatever Kate might have said in response. Thomas, it seemed, had impeccable timing when it came to emotional moments. Jackson pressed a kiss to her forehead before releasing her. "Go tend to our son," he said, the possessive pronoun sending a thrill through Kate's chest. "We have time now, all the time in the world." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony performed by Judge Willis in the parlor of their homestead. Elena and Manuel served as witnesses, along with Mrs. Thornton and Mrs. Holloway, the small gathering reflecting the private nature of their joy. Kate wore a new dress of pale blue silk, a gift from Jackson that brought out the color of her eyes. Thomas, resplendent in a white christening gown Kate had sewn during the quiet hours of her pregnancy, slept peacefully in Mrs. Holloway's arms throughout the brief service. "I believe you already have rings," Judge Willis noted with a twinkle in his eye, nodding to the simple gold band that had never left Kate's finger since the night of the town dinner. "We do," Jackson confirmed, his gaze never leaving Kate's face as he repeated the vows that would make official what had already become true in their hearts. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson's kiss was gentle but fervent, a promise and a claim all at once. Kate returned it with equal measure, no longer afraid to show the depth of her feelings. After their guests had departed with many well wishes and knowing smiles, Jackson and Kate stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas was nestled in his cradle inside, having been fed and settled for what would hopefully be several hours of sleep. "Happy, Mrs. Farrell?" Jackson asked, his arm around her waist drawing her close against his side. "Completely, Mr. Farrell," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "Though I'm not sure what the good people of Kingman will make of us having 2 weddings." Jackson chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Let them wonder. We know the truth." "And what is the truth?" Kate asked, echoing his question from weeks before. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious despite the smile that lingered at the corners of his mouth. "The truth is that sometimes life brings us exactly what we need, even when it comes in the most unexpected package." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "The truth is that I love you, Kate Farrell, and I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret giving me your heart." As his lips met hers in the deepening twilight, Kate knew with absolute certainty that her impulsive decision that day at the train station had led her not to temporary shelter, but to a permanent home in this place, with this man, and the family they had created against all odds. 5 years later, the homestead had changed in the years since that fateful meeting at the Kingman train station. What had once been a modest ranch had expanded into a prosperous horse breeding operation, with new outbuildings, expanded corrals, and a main house that had grown to accommodate a family that had also increased in size. Kate stood on the porch, watching as Jackson demonstrated proper bridle handling to their son. At 5, Thomas was the spitting image of his mother, with auburn hair that curled stubbornly, and the same determined set to his chin when he concentrated. But his mannerisms increasingly mimicked Jackson's, the way he tilted his head when listening, the patient approach he took to tasks that challenged him. "Like this, Papa?" Thomas asked, his small hands carefully arranging the leather straps as Jackson had shown him. "That's exactly right, son," Jackson confirmed, his face lighting with the pride he never bothered to conceal when it came to the boy. "You're a natural horseman." The scene made Kate's heart swell, as it did countless times each day. Jackson had never once treated Thomas as anything other than his own child, his love evident in every interaction, every lesson, every bedtime story. Thomas, for his part, worshipped the ground his father walked on, trailing after him whenever possible and soaking up every bit of knowledge Jackson shared. "Mama, look," Thomas called, spotting her on the porch. "I can do the bridle all by myself now." "I see that," Kate called back, smiling at his excitement. "You'll be running the ranch before we know it." A tug at her skirts drew her attention downward to where 3-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Farrell stood, her father's hazel eyes looking up from beneath a fringe of chestnut curls. "Mama, baby's kicking," she announced, placing a small hand on Kate's rounded belly with proprietary interest. "Is he now?" Kate covered her daughter's hand with her own, feeling the decisive movement of their third child due in less than 2 months. "Perhaps he's practicing to be as good a rider as you and Thomas." Sarah nodded seriously, accepting this as entirely plausible. At 3, she already showed a fearlessness on horseback that occasionally gave Kate heart palpitations, though Jackson insisted it was perfectly normal for a child raised on a ranch. The sound of an approaching wagon had them all looking toward the road, where Alina and Manuel were arriving for their weekly visit. Though they still helped occasionally with the ranch and household, they had prospered enough in recent years to purchase their own small property downriver, where they raised chickens and grew vegetables for the Kingman market. "Tia Alina!" Thomas shouted, abandoning his lesson to race toward the wagon, Sarah toddling after him as fast as her short legs would carry her. Jackson secured the bridle before following at a more sedate pace, pausing to drop a kiss on Kate's cheek as he passed. "Mrs. Diaz has promised tamales," he informed her with a grin. "I'd suggest working up an appetite." Kate laughed, swatting his arm lightly. "As if I need any help with that in my condition." His expression softened as he placed a gentle hand on her belly. "How are you feeling today? Any discomfort?" "None beyond the usual," she assured him, touched as always by his concern. This pregnancy had been easier than her first 2, though at 30 she was more aware of the physical demands motherhood placed on her body. They walked together to greet their visitors, the children already helping Manuel unload baskets of food and small gifts. Alina embraced Kate warmly, exclaiming over how well she looked before hustling everyone inside to escape the midday heat. The kitchen soon filled with delicious aromas and lively conversation as Alina shared the latest town gossip while preparing lunch. Mayor Prescott had finally been voted out of office, replaced by a younger man with progressive ideas about bringing the railroad spur directly to Kingman. Mrs. Whitaker's nephew had arrived from Boston to help with the store, causing quite a stir among the town's unmarried ladies. The new schoolteacher was organizing a Christmas pageant and had specifically requested Thomas for the role of the innkeeper. "He has a good, strong voice, that boy," Alina declared with the pride of an honorary grandmother. "He will make an excellent innkeeper." "Or lawyer," Jackson suggested with a wink at his son. "The way he argues his case for staying up past bedtime, he could convince a jury of anything." Thomas grinned, revealing a newly missing front tooth. "Papa says I could sell water to a fish." "And he would be right," Kate agreed, ruffling his hair affectionately. As they gathered around the table for Alina's feast, Kate looked around at the faces of her family, some bound by blood, others by choice and circumstance, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Jackson noticed, of course. He always did. His hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing gently in silent question. "Happy tears," she whispered, blinking them away. "Just counting my blessings." His smile, warm and intimate, conveyed that he understood completely. After 5 years of real marriage, they had developed the ability to communicate volumes with just a look or a touch. Later, after their guests had departed and the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Kate and Jackson sat on the porch swing in the cool evening air. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him as they gently rocked, the rhythmic motion soothing the active baby within her. "I received a letter from Mrs. Brennan today," Jackson mentioned, his voice quiet in the peaceful night. "She's selling her laundry business in town." Kate nodded against his shoulder. I heard from Alina. Apparently her son in California has finally convinced her to move west. I was thinking, Jackson continued, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm, we might consider purchasing the building. It's well located, and with the railroad coming, Kingman is only going to grow. Kate sat up slightly to look at him. What would we do with a laundry business? Jackson's expression was thoughtful. Not a laundry, necessarily, but you mentioned once that you missed your work as a seamstress. The building could be converted to a dress shop, perhaps, or whatever else might interest you. The suggestion caught Kate by surprise. Though she occasionally sewed for pleasure or practical necessity, she hadn't considered returning to her former profession. With the ranch and too soon to be 3 children, her days were full. You think I need an occupation beyond what I already have? She asked, curious rather than offended. Jackson shook his head. Not need, no, but I know how talented you are, Kate. I've seen the dresses you've made for Sarah, the shirts you've tailored for Thomas and me. If it's something that would bring you joy, I want to support it. The thoughtfulness of the offer touched her deeply. It was so typical of Jackson to notice her skills, to value them enough to create an opportunity for her to share them more widely if she wished. I'll think about it, she promised, settling back against him. Though it would have to wait until after this little one arrives and is a bit older. Of course, he agreed easily. There's no rush. The offer is there whenever if ever you want it. They fell into comfortable silence again, the only sounds the creak of the swing and the distant chorus of night creatures. Kate's thoughts drifted, as they sometimes did on quiet evenings, to the series of chances and choices that had led her to this moment. You ever think about it? She asked softly. How different our lives might have been if we hadn't met that day at the station. Jackson's arm tightened around her slightly. Sometimes, I imagine I would have kept my land claim but lost something far more precious. And I would have continued west, Kate mused. Perhaps found work in California, raised Thomas alone. The thought sent a chill through her, not because such a life would have been impossible, but because it would have lacked the richness, the completeness she had found with Jackson. I'm glad you got off that train in Kingman, Jackson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Even if your reasons for stopping weren't happy ones at the time. Kate turned in his embrace, meeting his gaze in the silvery moonlight. Do you know, I've never told you why I stopped here. It wasn't planned. I was headed for San Francisco. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly. I assumed your funds had run low, or you weren't feeling well enough to continue. Kate shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. Neither of those, though both were concerns. The truth is, I had a dream the night before we reached Kingman, vivid like a premonition. I dreamt of a home in the desert, children playing in a yard, and a man whose face I couldn't see clearly, but whose presence felt like. She paused, searching for the right words. Like safety, like belonging. And this dream convinced you to get off the train in a town you'd never heard of? Jackson asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely sure whether to believe her. It sounds foolish now, Kate admitted. But at the time it felt significant, important. When the conductor called out Kingman, something just clicked. I collected my things and stepped onto that platform without any plan beyond following a feeling I couldn't explain. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. My mother would have called that divine intervention, he said finally. A nudge from above when we need direction. And what do you call it? Kate asked. A smile spread slowly across his face, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. The best damn luck of my life, he said simply, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that, even after 5 years, still made her heart race. When they parted, breathless and smiling, Kate rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Jackson Farrell," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them. "And I love you, Catherine Farrell," he replied, his hand coming to rest on the swell of their unborn child. "Every day more than the last." As they sat entwined in the moonlight, the homestead peaceful around them and their children sleeping safely within, Kate reflected that some lies, told with good intentions, could ultimately lead to the deepest truths. What had begun as a desperate charade at a dusty train station had transformed into the most authentic, precious reality of her life. She was no longer unwed and alone, no longer facing an uncertain future with fear. She was Kate Farrell, beloved wife, cherished mother, respected member of her community. And she had found this life not by running from her past, but by having the courage to step off a train and trust a stranger who had looked at her in her most vulnerable state and seen not a burden, but a possibility. "Tell them you're my wife," he had said that day, offering a temporary fiction that had become her most treasured truth. And as the baby moved beneath their joined hands, a tangible symbol of their enduring love, Kate knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her.